Hi everybody, I'm Louis Bergeron, application expert at Robotiq. Welcome to this lesson. We're going to do today a finishing application with this kind of part here. It could be wood parts or metal parts. We're going to use our finishing kit with the bracket, which is already installed on the robots. We have the sanders. Mechanically, everything is done, except that we didn't pass the pneumatic hoses and the vacuums, but more or less we have installed all the mechanical stuff. And at first we're gonna just look at how we have configured this sander. So it's plugged on the controller on the configurable output 0. Here in the installation tab, we can set where we have connect this sander. So by using this, we're going to be able to start and stop the sander in the program itself. So we have started with a brand new program, an empty one. So we're going to really doing it from scratch at the starting point. And normally what we have as a starting point is a standard move J for home positions. So let's say that we're gonna use this as the home positions. So just teaching it, and I'm going to tell it that it's going to be the waypoint for home. So that's the starting points. Certainly what we want to achieve is right now is applying a force against the surface. So we're going to need a force node to be able to apply a force while we're going to execute the trajectories against the parts. So we're going to use the force control nodes. And right now we're going to use the force control node to apply a force against the parts. So it's going to be in the direction of the tool, in the Z direction of the tools. So we must select in the tool directions, and we're going to say that we're going to apply a force in the Z. For example, I can say 10 newtons in this directions. We are going to also use the target positions as a reference for the force control node to keep this information we're going to teach against the parts. We're going to use the path generator nodes to execute the surface. We need to sand or polish or buffing this surface. In this tool, the path generator, we have two tools, the 4 points and the 6 points. When we're looking at this surface here, if we want to polish the entire surface, we saw that we have two kind of surface. One right here is more line between lines, so it's basically linear surface everywhere, so we have line. And here what we have is a curve in one direction, so we have a curve in these directions, but it's still a line in the other directions. So with the tools we have those two nodes here. We saw that the 4 points, we can use it to execute a surface which is composed of line exclusively, so it's going to be perfect for this area. So we're going to start with the 4 points path generator to execute the first surface. At first we need to define the surface by the starting point, which is the point number 1. On this here we're going to teach the first point, which must be on the corner as the starting points. I'm going to orient the sander because basically we have the vacuum hoses, which is going to be a better orientation for the tools. And then we have the first corner right here. As we look at the pictures in the interface, we saw that if we want to travel like this, so a lot of paths in these directions, we can see that the point here is going to be the point number 3. So we're going to have a travel from 1 to the point number 3, which I'm going to teach right now, the point number 3. I'm going to still use the active drive to teach the second points. right there. And then here on the point number 2, so we're going to travel back and forth up to the junction between those two surfaces, the flat surface and the curved surface. For the curved surface, we must start at the junction of the both of surface. So it's going to be roughly in this area. So for the point number 2, I'm going to use the junction between both to go on the with the 4 points path generators. Right there. And we're going to hand this first surface at the endpoints. Just over here. So that's the first surface we have done. Before entering this node, we must just make an approach point just on top of the point number 1, which is on the corner right here. So if I go back on the point number 1, which is the starting point of the process here, we're going to make an approach point just before entering the force node. So I'm going to teach a waypoint just over it. So I'm going to add a waypoint for the approach. I'm going to set this approach point just over to start the process of descending. And I'm going to name this point the approach point. For the process itself, we need also to make a 0 to the force torque sensor internally to make sure that we have a constant force every time. So just before the home point and the approach point, we're going to place a 0 sensor node and make sure that we wait for the robot to be steady before making this 0. And then it will go to the approach point, and then it will enter the force control node, and it will start to control the robots to apply the force, and then it will go to the point number 1 of the 4 points path generator node. On the path generator node, I will have to say at which speed I will have to travel. So let's say 60 millimeters per second. And then we must define at which interval we want to have all the entire process to be done. So all the back and forths will be separated by default we have 30 millimeters. Let's say that we won't have 40 millimeters between all those paths. And then we have select that we want to end at the point number 4 here. So that's the first part of the program, so just to make the flat surface. So, and then we must also start the sender. Basically, we must start the sender as soon as we're going to be in contact with the parts. So just between the approach point and the path generator node, inside the force control node, we're going to start the sender. So just by going onto contact with the surface. So here we have the node to start the finishing tool. I'm going to place it just over the 4-point path generator, and I've select start tool. We have already defined which I/O we have used previously, the configurable output 0. And now the tool is going to start the sender at the beginning of the process. I'm going to show you that something which could be very important. If in fact and somehow the robot stops, I certainly want my sender to stop also, because if it stays on the same place and running, we can have some burns or problems with the parts. So on the installation tab, just to make sure that the sender will stop, we can, for example, configure the configurable output, which is right here, and to have a special action on it to put it low if the program is not running. So at any point, if the program stops, this output will put it at a low state and the sander will stop. So it will prevent any fire or any damage to the parts. And then when the process is finished, at the output of the force control node, when everything will be done, we're going to use the same finishing tool to stop it, to stop the sander. As a trial, we may try this first section of the process right now. So if we start it, we're going to have the first section of the programs which will be already done. So it's executing the surface by back and forth. So the path generator is generating everything needs to move to the entire surface and while applying a force, and then we have a full control of the speed and the force, and we have set an interval between all those back and forth to cover the first section of the parts. Now we're going to teach the second section of the parts, which is the curve pass here, and we're going to use the path generator 6-point tools. So the path generator 6-point tool allow us to make a surface which is composed of 2 circle arcs, and those 2 circle arcs are joined by line between the 2 arcs. So if we can saw here, we're going to have an arc right there and an arc on the other side. And to make it as a smooth, we're going to use the end of the first sections. So we're going to go to the last point of the first section, which was the point number 4. So if I go there, so that was where my first 4 points has ended. And I'm going to start right at this exact same spot for the 6-point path generator node. So here I'm going to have the exact same point. So they are built to be placed at the end of each other to have a continuous surface. So what we're going to teach now is the entire surface. So I'm going to teach the first arc, which is composed of the point number 1, number 2, and number 3. And then I'm going to go on the other side to teach the second arc, which is the point number 4, 5, and 6. So let's start the teaching process. So right now we have teach all the entire surface of the 6 point. Then we're going to be able to set at which speed we want to have the sender to move and what is the interval between each of those paths. So previously we saw that we have select 60 millimeters per second and a spacing of 40 millimeters. So we're going to use the same setting. So 60 millimeters per second and a spacing of 40 millimeters. And we can select that we're going to do linear pass. Linear pass meaning that we're gonna travel back and forth on the linear surface here, because the other choice we have is curved pass. So all the paths will be curved, which is not what we need on this particular example. So we're gonna use linear pass to the surface. And the process will finish at point number 6, which is this point. What we can do just at the output of the process is make a retract point, which is going to be just over here. And we must have the stop tool just prior to that. Just stop and then retract. Just gonna name retract. And then we can make a trial. So let's start the process. So we have the first 4 points path generators, which is going to execute the first section, which is composed just with linear surface. And then at the end, you're going to continue the process to go on the second section with the 6 point. So probably there, gonna go on the 6 point and is going to start the process of making all those linear paths through this curved surface here, and still at the same force apply with the tool. And now that we have finished learning how to use the path generator nodes in a process like this for a finishing application, to be able to teach an entire surface while applying a force with our sanding kit and all these finishing Copilot node we have for you.